video.
What kinds of things do you look for when it comes to someone that might have an eating disorder?
Right. So you can't ever know. It's not something you can see. So you can't judge by someone's weight, even weight loss. We sometimes, it's easy to think like, oh, well, someone's lost too much weight. They must have anorexia. But there's lots of other things that can cause weight loss, like depression, right? Cancer, HIV. We just can't make assumptions. So all we have to go on is our, you could call it your spidey sense, your sixth sense, whatever it is. If you sense something is going on, something has changed, even if you can't put your finger on it, it's always okay, I think, to bring that up to a friend. A stranger, no. But a friend, you can say, I just feel like something's different and I don't know what it is. And I just wanted to open the door to say if something's going on with you, I hope you feel I'm a safe person that you can talk to.
Hi, I'm Glennis Woods Mullins, and I love to help women to vibe, to be more vibrant, intuitive, beautiful, and empowered in midlife. So come on, let's vibe.
And audio.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to the V.I.B.E Living Podcast. It's great to be here today. And I'm going to be talking about something that all of us, I think, have heard about. But, as we age, we have a tendency to think that these kinds of things don't happen to older women. And I'm talking about eating disorders. Believe it or not, eating disorders aren't just for the 16-year-olds. There are women who have eating disorders also. And today we have a guest by the name of Jessica Sitnick. And she is well known by eating disorder professionals worldwide because she's really brought a new vision to the idea of eating disorders and really has opened the eyes to people with her training workshops, eating disorder boot camp, and hundreds of conferences that she's gone to and community presentations talking about eating disorders and spreading her message that thousands of healthcare professionals and all around the world literally have listened to and really have kind of some aha moments about the whole idea of eating disorders. Jessica, thanks so much for being on the V.I.B.E Living Podcast. It's wonderful to have you here today.
I feel the same way, and I love your energy already. I know we're going to get along great.
That's fantastic. Really, seriously, a lot of people do think that eating disorders are for, the adolescent or the gymnast or the athlete or whatever. But the reality is that anyone, any age could have it. But in particular, women over 40, this is something that is one of the things they keep near and dear to their hearts that they don't even talk about, nor do they think they even fall into that category. So my first question is, what is your definition of an eating disorder?
Sure. So it's a very simple definition. Do problems happen when you eat or when you don't eat? That's it.
Do problems happen? Problems like problems with relationships.
Do you feel guilty and regretful? Do you feel like you have to undo what you ate? Do you only eat when you're with other people, but you don't eat when you're alone? Do you use compensatory behaviors? Do you fear food? And so I ignore the diagnostic criteria because they're really not made to describe the human experience. And shamefully for my field, our whole field was kind of based on what we now call the swag stereotype, which is skinny, white, adolescent girl. That is not who has eating disorders, but that's who the field was sort of based on. The idea that it's an affluent disease and it's only young girls, everything you were saying before, which we know isn't true. Anyone who eats can have problems eating. So that's where my definition comes from is, are there problems? If someone's experiencing a problem, then that's when we want them to reach out for help rather than feeling ashamed of it.
Now, how did you get involved in this topic?
So my degree in college was anthropology, and I really had no idea how I would turn that into a career, but I love the idea of human development, right? And if you're not familiar with anthropology, it's the study of humans over time, right?
Okay.
How we developed culture, how we developed words and language, how we developed physically. So interesting. And so when I took nutrition as an elective, I decided I would pursue a career in nutrition. Well, at that time, so about maybe almost 30 years ago now, 1990s, the only area where it was really kosher to talk about those things in nutrition was eating disorders. I think that it's important to talk about in every area. And that's started to take off in all areas of nutrition, the cultural aspects, the belief aspects, the way you're raised, the way different bodies may process foods differently. All of that is now something that's talked about. But 30 years ago, it was really only in the eating disorder field that you could talk to people about their eating behavior and how they felt after eating and the psychology of eating and why people made the choices they made. I think that is so interesting. It's like a microcosm. Every person has their own reasons, right? So that's why it's hard in the eating disorder field, because every person you meet is different. There's no set protocol where you can say, you have this problem, do this solution. But it's also the most rewarding because you really get to know people. So that's how I got into the eating disorder field and why I love it.
That's interesting. From anthropology to nutrition to actually talking about an eating disorder. But there's something there that's kind of directly correlated, because eating disorders are so much tied to what's going on with us socially, what's going on with our environment, how we grew up, the kinds of things we normally ate, how food was used. Because one thing I've noticed in Western culture is that we have food for everything. For celebrations, for deaths, for births, for birthdays, graduations. There's food all the time. And I'm wondering how much of that feeds into the beginning of some people's eating disorders.
Well, so it's interesting because I don't think it's the abundance of food exactly that causes an eating disorder. It's more the way we talk about it. Like you said, the more the way we treat it. So something like this food is only for a special occasion. That scarcity is what actually drives the eating disorder. Even though we could have pumpkin pie in July, we don't. Most people usually have it around this time in the fall, right? Thanksgiving maybe. And so it creates that scarcity. So when we're around it, we really want more, if you even like pumpkin pie. But we do that with lots of different things. And I think it's actually diet culture that promotes eating disorders, because diet culture is always trying to restrict us from something, whether it's carbs, whether it's gluten, whether it's all these things that we're told. I mean, if you pick any food in the entire world and you could find someone somewhere that's going to tell you why you shouldn't eat it, right? And so it affects us more the closer to home it is. So if we've grown up with someone who says, oh, I don't eat any blank, we internalize that more, especially from a younger age. And so it's that restriction that then leads to being sneaky about it, or feeling guilty when you do eat it, or trying not to eat it and then overdoing it when you do dabble. So it ends up being the restricting that actually causes the eating disorders.
Interesting, which kind of makes sense when you think about the fact that midlife women might be suffering from an eating disorder, because their whole lives they've been hearing about diets and what to eat and what not to eat. And there is as many different ways of thinking about eating, what you should and should not eat, as I feel, as there are people. I mean, it's overwhelming. The information that is
sisters. Yes.
Yeah, it's overwhelming. So in your opinion, what is the best diet? I mean, what makes sense?
So there's the easy guidelines, right? Which is sort of, thinking about the food that comes out of the ground, that as opposed to the more processed foods, right? So natural foods. But there's a big PS to that, which is that doesn't mean you can't ever eat any food. And so looking at food, this is going to sound so weird, I think, for someone who's never considered it, but food is really just molecules, right? So my body doesn't know the difference. Once it's chewed up and mashed and swirled up in my system, my body doesn't really know the difference if I ate, let's say, a turkey and cheese sandwich versus a piece of pizza, right? There's some cheese, there's some carbs, like a source of protein, a source of carbohydrates, a source of fats, and that all, my body breaks it apart into the molecules and knows what to do with it somehow. It's a miracle, if you ask me. I don't know how this hair was made. I don't have to consciously know, but my body took care of it from the molecules and the ingredients in food. But yet, for some reason, people have an instant feeling of a turkey sandwich must be healthier than pizza, or, oh, a turkey sandwich and pizza, you shouldn't eat either one of those, right? It's those ideas. And if we started thinking about it just as molecules, then it has less power over us. And so to think about you want all the different kinds of molecules in your body, right? In order to make hair, in order to make skin, in order to make a healthy heart. We want to have all the nutrients that there are instead of trying to select which ones. And that's the beauty of food, is when you look at food, it's like, it's amazing. It provides all the nutrients we need and we don't have to know. but yet we start putting our conscious control on it and thinking, I have to take all these supplements, I have to do all this manipulating of my food, rather than recognizing if you have a big rainbow, let's say, of food, the more variety of food you eat, the more nutrients you're going to get automatically. That's the main goal, is to not be limiting and not be focusing on what you shouldn't have, but instead try to eat a variety of foods. It's so simple.
No, I agree with you. I always tell my clients that if you want to really, improve your eating, add things that you know are healthy. And over time, the things that aren't as healthy kind of just begin to drop off after a while. The more
Or they
nutrient
sort of get
dense.
diluted out, right?
Right, that's right. You don't crave them anymore. And you're eating more nutrient dense food. So, your hunger and snacking between and all those kinds of things don't seem to matter as much. But let's say we have someone who's something's going on. A friend of ours, we're looking at some things and thinking something's going on here. How do you talk to someone that you suspect may have an eating disorder? What do you say?
Yeah. Okay, so the number one thing is not at a mealtime. Okay, do not comment on what they are eating. That is prime time for shame, and shame never triggers anything useful. So to say, is that all you're going to eat? Not helpful. Or do you really think you need that second portion? Not helpful. So those are the things not to say at a totally separate time, not around food. Because remember, if someone is struggling with their eating, food related time is very vulnerable for them. So a totally different time. Just say, I've been thinking about something. It's just kind of been on my mind and I wanted to bring it up to you. Is this good timing? And then say, I just noticed a change in you. Because remember, it's not about their body size. It's not about their eating exactly. It's a change. If someone's always been a picky eater and they're still a picky eater, that just may be how they are. But if you've noticed a change in someone, I've noticed that you seem to really seem anxious when we go out to dinner, and that's different. Or I've noticed, maybe I'm imagining it, but I feel like I've noticed a change in your eating. Or maybe I'm imagining it, but I've noticed that every time after we eat together, you seem to leave the table for quite a while before you come back. And I just wanted to hear your thoughts on that. I just felt like I wouldn't be a good friend if I didn't mention it. And then just leave the door open for what they say next.
This is interesting because as you're talking, people might want to say, well, now, I think there might be a problem, but how do I know? What kinds of things do you look for when it comes to someone that might have an eating disorder?
Right. So you can't ever know. It's not something you can see. So you can't judge by someone's weight, even weight loss. We sometimes, it's easy to think like, oh, well, someone's lost too much weight, they must have anorexia. But there's lots of other things that can cause weight loss, like depression, right? Cancer, HIV. We just can't make assumptions. So all we have to go on is you could call it your spidey sense, your sixth sense, whatever it is. If you sense something is going on, something has changed, even if you can't put your finger on it, it's always okay, I think, to bring that up to a friend. A stranger, no. But a friend, you can say, I just feel like something's different and I don't know what it is. And I just wanted to open the door to say, if something's going on with you, I hope you feel I'm a safe person that you can talk to. Because the outcome of these conversations is not for your friend to confess something to you, is not for your friend to say, I will change, I promise to change, or something like that. The outcome of the conversation is really for you to assist your friend in the way that they ask for help. So to say, I would be happy to look up counselors and see if I could find someone for you. Would that be a way I could help you, right? Or would you want me to go to your doctor with you? Would you be willing to talk with your doctor about this? I'd be happy to wait in the waiting room or go in with you to talk to your doctor and support you, right? So the goal is not for you to solve your friend's problem, but to get them to speak with a professional.
Right, kind of to plant that seed and open up the conversation to get them to start thinking. It's interesting because as I mentioned earlier when we first got started talking about the whole idea of midlife women not having this problem. But when you think about it, a lot of midlife women do have an interesting relationship with food. And a lot of midlife women have a tendency to kind of like struggle with their body image. So let's take a look at the body image thing.
Okay, sure.
How can we have a better body image as midlife women, just period? And not so much just because we have an eating disorder, but just in general, because sometimes maybe that how we conceptualize our bodies might be one of the reasons why we end up with a disorder.
Yeah.
So where do we start with that?
So as a midlife woman myself at 52,
Oh, okay, you could be my child. I'm 67.
but we're going through menopausal changes. We're going through body
Yes.
changes. What I think is so important, and I've had to really work on this myself. So this is not empty platitudes. This is really my own stuff, is that where did we get the idea that once we became adults, our bodies weren't going to keep changing? Right? It's sort of like once you grow to your adult height, you sort of make up in your head that I'm done now. I'm done growing. I'm finished. And so when we see wrinkles or we see a little change in our body shape, we think this is wrong. If I were doing it right, I would maintain the same size, the same shape, the same everything till the end of my days. Why? Where did we get that idea? Menopause is like a second puberty. My gosh, right? So if we can be more embracing of this is the next stage, it's so ironic. We expect kids to go through puberty and blossom and grow and all this stuff, and they're just supposed to accept it. But then when it happens to us, we're all mad about it and we're trying to control it. So it is an opportunity for a lot of problems to develop. And so for me, what I've done for myself, and maybe this will help some listeners, is I think about the people I've lost who didn't have the privilege of aging, who didn't get wrinkles, who will never have gray hair. And I remember that it is a privilege to age. And then I think about people I know who are, let's say, Maya Angelou comes to mind as someone who aged so beautifully, so significantly, so meaningfully. I'm looking at you with your gray hair and thinking you're gorgeous, right? So looking at role models of aging that are meaningful to us, as opposed to looking always at the younger models and the younger version and thinking we're supposed to go back to that. And we don't have a lot of representation of women as they age. Helen Mirren comes to mind, right? Judi Dench. We need to fill our Instagram feeds with people who are aging beautifully, and I don't just mean physically beautifully, but I mean wisdom and right.
Right,
And
all of that.
yes,
When I first got started in this business, which was almost 17 years ago, and when I would do blogs and things like that, I would look for images of women over 40 to put on the blog. It was so hard. And over the years, I've seen the change, and it's not as hard anymore, especially now with AI. You can do all kinds of things.
true.
But it's like there's this awareness that's slowly beginning to evolve. And people tell me all the time, you don't look 67. And my response is, I say, what does 67 look like? I mean, the what a 67 looks like is in the eye of the beholder, based upon our life experiences and what we've seen before, based upon the role models and things. And for years and years and years, 67 was probably somebody in a rocking chair, orthopedic shoes, lots of wrinkles, hair in a little net, probably a baby in the arms and a Kit Kat and knitting on the side, cup of tea, rocking. Okay. That sure ain't me.
Right.
So in some ways, I think women are just themselves beginning to destroy that myth because of their desire to live longer and healthier lives. We don't have to be that way.
I agree with that. And also, forgive me for saying this because I'm not trying to blame any one half of the population, but I think it also reflects women getting into positions of power where women are in control of the advertising images.
Yes. Madison Avenue is changing, and you do not have to apologize. Absolutely. One of the reasons why we have some of the issues we have in terms of how we evaluate things, that is through the scope of a male. As a white male, basically, who's setting all the tones and everything. And we still are adhering to a lot of those things they set like in the 50s, like counting calories and all these different things that aren't really a part of our experience and definitely not realistic for a midlife woman. Yeah, you want to be aware of what you're putting in your mouth, but there's certain nutrients and things that we need to have that might be a higher caloric value than something else. And that doesn't mean that you should not eat it. So I believe that you're right. People are beginning to change, beginning to change their concept. But what are some of the causes of eating disorders? Because I think that midlife women, when they're listening to this podcast, they might be thinking, well, how could I possibly have an eating disorder? Or how do you get one? So what could be some of the causes?
Okay, so I put them in 4 categories. Like you said, for every person, there's probably a different path, right? So we can't make any generalization about each individual, but I put them in 4 categories. One is biological, right? So you start having hypothyroidism or something, and that causes weight gain and eating changes, and you're confused and you're trying to control that with diet, not realizing that you have a medical problem underneath. I include in that category things like losing your taste and smell from COVID, depression, anxiety, obsessive compulsive disorder, things that are medical, diabetes, things that reasons you have to change your eating, finding out you have celiac disease, reasons that you have to change your eating or that you choose to change your eating, but you don't realize something medical is underlying it. And so that is one path. And what we really need to do is figure out the underlying thing. But diet culture has sort of convinced us that if our bodies change, it must be our fault. And so we forget to look for a medical reason underneath it, not even mentioning all the weight stigma in the medical profession that sometimes misses these things and tells us to just push away from the plate. And that's not the problem at all. So
yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Especially with midlife women in particular, as you mentioned, our bodies are changing anyway. Hormonally, it's all over the place. And that's still something that women don't really know a lot about. They're just beginning to start talking more about it in terms of how much hormones impact our
But
weight
that is
gain.
that is just one path. There's also the stress and trauma related path. And we women are completely like, that is our lives. I think there are some things that a man will just never understand that we go through as women, how deeply we feel, how much we care about our communities, about the children in our lives, how much we take care of behind the scenes. I know my husband walks by sometimes and I'm on some kind of customer service phone call, and later he'll say, "Hun, I just think there's so much you do for our family that I don't even know about, and I just want to say thank you." And I appreciate that, but there is a lot of stuff that guys just don't really realize we are bearing, we are carrying with us. And so there's chronic stress, that there's also traumatic events. The individual events can cause, what happens is they change our brain chemistry. And the things that also change our brain chemistry involve eating and not eating, both change brain chemistry. Vomiting changes your brain chemistry. Abusing laxatives changes your brain chemistry. Diet pills change your brain chemistry. So sometimes we don't realize that stress has drained our good chemicals, and food can put those chemicals back in. I mean, there's a direct pathway from eating carbs to serotonin in your brain. And right? True. And so there's a lot of that stress, and some of the stress is underlying things that are not related to food itself, like, for example, systemic racism or something like that, which is a huge stress, all the disparities and inequalities. But then if we've actually had a traumatic experience related to food, it even exacerbates that. So, for example, I'm thinking of Friends. Everybody's seen Friends, right? Chandler's parents announced they were getting divorced at the Thanksgiving table. He won't eat Thanksgiving food, right? Or I always think of Hurricane Katrina because I live in Texas, and I'm thinking about someone sitting on their roof for 3 days, not knowing if they're going to get rescued, and how I can't even imagine the painfulness of that. But P.S., they also didn't have anything to eat. So now you've got a traumatic event that is linked together with food or being incarcerated, a situation where there's limited food available and at limited times. And so someone who's trying to process these intense events that have happened to them that also were related to food may have an eating disorder or a food-related behavior that is not necessarily productive to their life, but is harming them even after the traumatic event has passed.
That's amazing. Now, with eating disorders, we always talk about it in terms of females. Do men also have eating disorders?
Oh, yes, absolutely. Yes. Every group that you can imagine, anyone who eats can have an eating disorder. And so I kind of laugh to myself. I don't laugh loudly at them usually, but when a reporter calls and says something like, "Tell me about the new trend of eating disorders in teenage boys," and I just think it's not new. It's news, but it's not new, right? Or tell me about the new trend of eating disorders in midlife women, right? It's not new. It's part of our fabric, right?
Our awareness may be raised, but it's always been there.
Yes.
And that's why I love the idea of some of the things you're doing. I know you have this companion workbook. It's called Healing Your Inner Eater.
Yes.
What is that? What is that? What's involved in that?
Oh my gosh, I just got back from doing a Healing Your Inner Eater workshop, and it's so powerful. And so this is the companion workbook, but you can do the workbook without participating in the workshop. Excuse me. It is for anyone who wants to look at how they became the eater that they are, because so much of what we do with eating is unconscious. And the only way to change it is to bring it into consciousness and then decide if it's something we want to continue or not. And since so much is about our ancestors and the people who came before us and how they were raised and their experiences with food, and there's no one alive who isn't descended from someone who was either impoverished or a refugee or enslaved or in World War II or lived through the Great Depression. We all carry the weight of that, even if we don't realize it, even if we don't know. And so Healing Your Inner Eater helps you look at who were the people that raised you, what were their experiences with food, how might that have been transmitted to you, and then which of these food rules or lore or beliefs do you want to keep, which are productive and helping you and which are holding you back. And how can you say to an ancestor something like, in your imagination, I suppose, because they may not be living, like, I forgive you for being human. Even though it hurt me, the things that you taught me, and I want to let them go. It's hard to let things go that were passed on because we feel like we're betraying that person. And so the idea is to say, I understand why it was important to you that I eat everything on my plate. But now the right healthy choice for me is not always to finish everything on my plate. It's
Wow,
tough.
that's very powerful. It sounds like that workbook can also help us uncover other things behaviorally when you really start looking back and taking a look at your ancestors, your grandparents, and your parents and how they are raised and things that they do. And then you begin to think, oh, that's maybe the reason why I do certain things.
Yes.
That is wonderful. What a great tool. In fact, we're going to have the link to your workbook, Food Fairy Tales, on the show page. So please feel free to go ahead and order that. I think we should all take a look at what we've been eating and why we eat and what our feelings are about food, because I think in this country, we have so many underlying issues that we don't talk about. So why not start with food? And who knows where it might go from there.
Food is a metaphor. You are so right on. Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. Jessica, thank you so much for coming and sharing. You opened my eyes to a few things. I'm going to get that workbook and figure out what's going on in my head with food. It's wonderful having you here today and wonderful hearing more about the eating disorders and the fact that, gosh, we need to really take a look at all the different components that go into the food that we eat and why we eat what we eat.
And may I just offer one more thing, which is
Yes.
that it is never too late and you are never too old to heal. Anything that is feeling, if you are feeling shameful while we're talking, if you're feeling that there's something you do with your food that you want to change, I would ask you, I hope that you have a friend that's close enough that you could share that with, but if not, write it down on a piece of paper, even if you end up crumpling it and throwing it away, because the things that we're ashamed of are killers. We have to get things out so that we can hear that we're just normal. We're just people finding our way.
Yeah,
You're not broken. You're not ruined. You're not killing yourself. Whatever it is that you think that you are doing to yourself, please share it with one other person, whether it's a minister, whether it's a best friend, spouse, significant other, or your diary. Just start the process of recognizing that you're not alone.
That is so important. And thank you for saying that. You're right. But we need to sometimes bring these things out into the light. It's kind of like a infected wound. You know, you put a Band-Aid on it, you think that's going to take care of it. But at some point, you got to take the Band-Aid off so it can be exposed to the light so they can heal. Jessica, thank you so much for being on the V.I.B.E Living podcast. It's been wonderful having you here today.
Thank you. My pleasure.
You're welcome. And thank you to all of you who have stopped by to listen to the V.I.B.E Living podcast. And as I always like to say, thank you for making us in the upper 10% globally in podcasts that are listened to. I'm so grateful for that. And if you liked what you heard today or any of the other podcasts that we have on the show page, please go ahead and share it, subscribe, and like the podcast. It's been wonderful getting a chance to share with you some of the kinds of things that you might want to think about when it comes to being vibe, being more vibrant, intuitive, beautiful, and empowered along your midlife wellness journey. Thanks so much for listening, everybody. Have a fantastic day, and don't forget to vibe. Bye-bye, everybody. Thanks for listening to the V.I.B.E Living podcast. And don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment, and share this podcast. Have a fantastic day, and don't forget to vibe. Bye-bye, everybody.